Paranormal in Pennsylvania may discuss topics such as suicide, murder, and other potentially upsetting things. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Paranormal in Pennsylvania,
where we discuss history and haunts.
Today's story takes us to America's first crematory. I'm Sarah.
And I'm David.
Let's get into it. So, as we know, we are very into the morbid and the paranormal. I was so excited to go see this crematory. I think it's such an interesting part of history. I actually first heard about it from the YouTube channel Ask a Mortician, but they have really limited hours. There's literally 4 or 5 days a year you can go. It's the second Saturday of summer months, and it's open from like 1 to 3. So we drove. It was about, 40 minutes?
Yeah.
And it was not open when we got there.
It was raining, but we didn't know that would prevent them from opening. Or that's the assumption we're making.
Yeah. But we did still look around the crematory, and we looked around the town as well. We went to like the center of the town and looked around. So we're covering today both the LeMoyne House and the LeMoyne Crematory because they were owned by the same family and the hauntings coincide. So these places are located in Washington, PA, and owned by the Historical Society there. The LeMoyne family was very controversial for their time. Francis Julius LeMoyne and his father both worked as physicians. Despite the fugitive slave law of 1850 being active during his life, Francis actively spoke up about abolition, and it is said that the LeMoyne House was part of the Underground Railroad. He also spoke out about women's rights, specifically the right to education, and he actually started an all-female seminary school and funded a free public library to encourage education for all, which is really cool. All I knew was about the crematory when we went. But to get into the history of that, he was clearly also an early adopter of the idea of cremation and built crematory on his property in 1876 with the goal of being cremated there himself. This was the first crematory in the Western Hemisphere, so not just America. Big deal in death-positive history.
Why was it the first? Or why hadn't cremation been done before?
So it was the first formal crematory, so there was definitely a history of, burnings and stuff of bodies, but it wasn't considered proper. It was considered savage. And this was a controversial time because they didn't really know what was causing people to get sick. They didn't know much about germ theory. And they thought that by burning a body, it would make it more infectious. Which is incorrect.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So he was actually cremated there and achieved his goal in 1879, just 3 years after it was completed, and his ashes are buried out front. We saw where they are. It's a very modest building. It's only 20 by 30 feet, and it's brick. There's an entrance room and then the actual crematory, so not much space. And a total of 41 people were cremated there. So now moving on to the house. The house was built in 1812, and it's located at 49 East Maiden Street. Today it operates as a museum for the LeMoyne family. Unfortunately, it was closed, so we weren't able to go inside. They're doing renovations, but the LeMoyne family did maintain ownership of it, with Francis's daughter Madeline dying there in 1943 at the age of 100, which is crazy for the 40s, I feel.
100 is certainly, even today, 100 is not anything to knock.
That's a good point. So that's the history. Definitely a lot of cool history. I feel like this is one of those families that, of course, you don't hear much about, but was a really pivotal part of American history, especially in the death community. So also haunted locations. So the locals know the LeMoyne House as a very haunted home. The house actually even offers ghost tours. One guest described the experience as, quote, "It is like all the conversations that ever took place in the house are replaying one over another," end quote.
Interesting. What? But why?
So it's said that it's not uncommon to hear whispering throughout the house. So I was thinking it might be like competing whispers, whereas when I think we think of whispering hauntings, it's like one voice. But imagine if it was coming from multiple locations.
But what is bringing the haunting is like kind of my question.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, people did die there.
I mean, yeah, I was just wondering if it had anything to do with the crematory, you think, but or just natural, because the house and the crematory are close by to each other.
Yeah, because it was on the LeMoyne property.
Yes.
So there's also footsteps on the second floor, heard by the staff specifically after hours. A common ghost sighting is a woman wearing Civil War era clothing, and this ghost has been reported by staff and visitors alike. She's typically seen walking up the stairs or running between rooms, almost as if she doesn't want to be seen. She has not been identified, but Frances did have 5 daughters, and as I said in the history section, we do know that Madeline died there. So it's thought that she's one of the LeMoyne daughters.
Interesting. And I'm wondering, I'm just really caught up on the whispering, and why whispers?
I mean, I think that's a common haunting. How else do you think it would manifest?
More of like you hear conversations.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm wondering if it's because so much of what they did was secretive. Like, having a crematory wasn't popular. It's alleged that they were part of the Underground Railroad, so that would be whispered stuff.
Well, that'd make more sense.
Yeah. Something that I do think is interesting is this woman in Civil War era clothing, because Madeline, although she died in the house, she didn't die until 1943.
That's pretty late.
Yeah, and so that would have made her, what? If the Civil War started in 61 and she was 100 when she died, she was 18. I guess she's 18 when it started.
But still, well, that's like significant. Like you're an adult then.
Yeah. And I mean, the Civil War must have been significant, especially if they were part of the Underground Railroad.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely, like when you hear of a child living through like the Blitz or something, and they're like 5 years old, you have some working memory, but not like a full grasp of what's happening.
Yeah, didn't Nana live through the Blitz?
Yeah, my grandmother did.
That's cool. There are some reports of a woman in a blue dress roaming the halls, but it hasn't been confirmed if it's the same as the other ghost, if it's a blue Civil War era dress or it's separate, because typically the people reporting these are different people. The ghost has been confirmed as Madeline, however, because people who have seen her have seen the picture and confirmed it's her. Specifically, when an administrative assistant and another staff member were flipping through the house's clothing database, the administrative assistant pointed to a blue dress and said she had seen someone wearing it around the house. Knowing that the dress was in storage and not accessible, they identified that it was probably a ghost, and the dress was handmade in 1880 and was only ever worn by Madeline. So that's, I mean, I guess it's not a direct identification, but it's a really logical thought process.
You're not making a logical leap there.
Madeline is actually known to be a fairly active ghost, not just walking around in a blue dress, but people report negative feelings in her room. Some say they feel as if they're underwater and can't get enough air, which is interesting because it didn't say how she died, so I wonder if it was some sort of lung affliction like pneumonia.
Yeah, or just consumption.
Yeah. Items regularly fall off her dresser, and it's said that she interferes with technology in the house, specifically cameras.
Interesting. It's like goes back to the idea of like technology. Now, granted, cameras then, I think in the 40s, looked somewhat similar to modern cameras.
I think so. Yeah.
So I could see like that identification, but it's always interesting when a ghost interacts with technology when they're like 200 years before that piece of technology was there.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's that she doesn't want to be photographed.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. So the current dining room was actually the operating room when the LeMoyne physicians lived there. The dining room specifically is known to be very haunted, unsurprisingly. It apparently is always significantly cold even when the rest of the house is warm. There are gas lights in there, and they are constantly being blown out by unknown forces. A former caretaker said that they hated sitting in the room, that something just felt off to them. There are also reports of phantom bloodstains that cannot be washed away and remain even after over 100 years on the floor. Washington and Jefferson College students, which is a college in the area, were invited to the house for dinner by Madeline when she was alive, and a few of them had such a haunting experience that they refused to ever return to the house, and they had had dinner in that dining room. One specifically reported feeling a hand on their shoulder when no one was there, and they confirmed the phantom bloodstains and the cold temperatures.
That is spooky.
Yeah.
So I don't know about the phantom bloodstains, but when somebody feels like a hand on their shoulder, that's certainly very spooky. And then what was the other thing?
The cold temperature.
Oh yeah, the cold temps are always interesting too when you're walking through a home and all of a sudden it's just very cold where you are.
Yeah, and I was trying to think about it because it was the operating room, and I know that they keep operating rooms colder, but I can't imagine that they could do that back then without air conditioning unless they just kept blocks of ice.
Yeah, I don't know about how they did the operating rooms back then, but it wasn't in the basement, was it?
No, it was the dining room. It's on the first floor.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
And how eerie to turn it into a dining room after.
Dine with the dead.
There you go. There's a tagline. So the Bassetttown Paranormal Society did an investigation here and recorded a voice saying, "You just walked right over me," in the basement. Another auditory haunting is the sound of horse hoofs walking along East Maiden Street, which can be heard from within the house regularly.
But did they catch the recording outside of the house as well?
Of the "you just walked right over me"?
No, of the horse.
No, it's just inside the house. So there's no real horses.
Well, it kind of makes me think of... Oh, wait, I can't talk about the bar, can I? The tavern.
About a tavern we will cover in the future.
Yeah. Makes me think of an interesting thing that happened at a future event, future podcast episode. Yeah. Spooky.
Yeah. Where you're saying where it's like a window to the outside.
A window to another time. Or another time. Or Trap Dead. I don't know how you want to say it.
Yeah, it's almost through the idea of like windows as looking glasses into a different time, or like you're saying, like how spirits are trapped in mirrors, but instead trapped in windows. But this would be auditory only, so that's interesting.
Well, yeah, so that was the follow-up to that, is that it's interesting that you hear that, although, what was it, in one of the, oh my gosh, courthouse, you would also hear sounds from the outside on the inside.
Yeah. I think Iron Hill had that too.
Yes, Iron Hill definitely had these things.
Yeah.
Where you would hear like a horse trotting through the area.
Yeah. So while not as haunted, since that was all about the house and not about the crematory, there are reports of paranormal activity at the crematory. When passing by on the anniversary of the first cremation, there are reports of people smelling smoke and seeing lights peeking from behind the shutters. The first report of this actually came 10 years after the first cremation, when a local reported that the crematory was still active even after it had closed for the day. When they spoke to Francis, who was still alive at the time, he confirmed that there was no cremation that day and no explanation for the smoke and light.
It feels like a couple things that could be explaining that. One, it could just be a story, because as you mentioned, it was rather taboo, so plenty of people would like to decry it. And I guess like my second question would be, when was the last cremation before this report? Oh wait, you said 10 years.
Well, it was still an active crematory at this time. It had been open for 10 years, but Francis confirmed that there wasn't a cremation that day. So someone called to be like, "Hey, I think you did not put the fire out today."
Well, so that was where I was going with this, is it could have been coals or something left over. Is how did they perform the cremations then?
I don't know how to answer that question. It's not like a machine like today. It was coals, but there was no cremation that day. And he went and there were no coals or anything.
Oh, interesting. The no coals part is...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it had to be paranormal, and it's actually still reported today. Apparently the people in town just know that sometimes you'll see smoke and lights coming from the crematory.
That's... See, like, it's just like, I want to see video of it.
Yeah, I do too. Because I wonder if it's like a local legend.
Right, because it's... if it happens so regularly, surely somebody must be able to get a video of it.
Yeah. So that's it for the LeMoyne House and Crematory. Definitely, I think, worth the visit. And to answer the question of would I go to this place of paranormal phenomena, yes, I would love to go back when they're open. I think just for the history itself, it's absolutely incredible. This is, again, a figure that not many people know about. The first crematory, part of the Underground Railroad, really an advocate for women's rights and abolition. So I think the history itself is just cool. What about you?
I would go back.
Yeah, I would love to see the crematory. I would love to go there on a ghost hunt to the house or the crematory.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really cool area too, so would recommend going and visiting. It's a cute little town. There's lots of stuff to do around it. So even like, making a day trip of it,
Yeah.
would be a fun thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of Paranormal in Pennsylvania. Tune in next Thursday to see what hauntings we discuss next.